They sat me in a glass-walled conference room and slid a stack of printouts across the table. Fraudulent vendor payments, all approved with my login. HR stared at me like I was a headline waiting to happen. I kept my voice level while my stomach flipped. These show your digital signature approving payments to Green Sparrow LLC, the HR director said, her rehearsed tone cutting through the morning air. $63,000 over 4 months. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I picked up the papers with steady hands and studied the timestamps. Every single approval hit at 3:03 a.m. Legal sat silent in the corner, taking notes. If I'm guilty, I said, sliding the untouched coffee back across the table, why do the approvals hit at 3:03 a.m. on nights I was on a red-eye to Chicago? The room went quiet. I signed the suspension letter they pushed toward me and walked out without another word. My badge was deactivated before I reached the elevator. In the parking garage, I sat in my car with shaking hands and opened my phone. I started typing a timeline in my notes app. The first entry read, March 15th, suspended for fraud I didn't commit. My name is Mara Keating. I'm from Ohio, 34 years old, and until that morning, I was a mid-level controls analyst who lived on color-coded spreadsheets and clean audit trails. I was the person who caught mistakes before they became scandals. I was also boringly meticulous. I backed up everything, documented meetings, and kept detailed calendar entries. My colleagues used to joke that I probably had a spreadsheet for my grocery lists. They weren't wrong. The scam was simple. A shell vendor, inflated invoices, forged approvals. What wasn't simple was how neatly my colleagues had threaded my name through it. Tessa Moran, Colby Nash, and Owen Pike had painted me as the perfect scapegoat. As I drove home in stunned silence, Tessa's words echoed in my head. She'd whispered them as she left the conference room. You always worked late anyway. That phrase stuck like a splinter. It felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it. I pulled over and added it to my timeline, word for word. If they thought I'd break quietly, they'd underestimated me completely. I reached for process, not revenge. At my kitchen table, I spread out everything I had: calendar entries, VPN logs, flight confirmations, and hotel receipts. Every fact got a timestamp. My hands stopped shaking when the first inconsistency appeared. The earliest fraudulent approval was dated February 8th at 3:03 a.m. I pulled up my calendar. That night, I was on United Flight 1247 to Chicago, departing at 11:30 p.m. My badge had been inactive since 4:15 p.m. the previous day. I cross-referenced every single approval with my whereabouts. The pattern was perfect. They'd chosen nights when I was traveling, when my badge was offline, when I had solid alibis. It was almost insulting how obvious it was once you looked. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote, Personal Audit on the cover. Page 1. Physical Impossibilities. I listed each approval alongside my location that night. Chicago, Denver, Boston. 3 different time zones, all with documented proof I was nowhere near the office. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Heard what happened. You okay? I typed back, I will be. And for the first time since that conference room, I actually believed it. The next morning, I called HR. Company policy stated that employees had the right to review any statements they'd signed during investigations. I wanted my file. I'll need to follow up on that, the HR director said, her tone suddenly evasive. There are procedures to follow. I pulled up the employee handbook on my laptop and found the exact clause. Section 12.3. Employees have the right to review investigative documents containing their statements within 5 business days of a written request. I drafted a formal email, highlighted the policy section, and sent it with read receipt. Within an hour, an automated out-of-office reply bounced back. The HR director who'd sat across from me that morning was suddenly out of the office until further notice. That afternoon, I drove to the office. My keycard was dead, but I sat in the parking lot and watched. Tessa, Colby, and Owen all left together at 5:30 p.m., huddled in conversation. They walked to Colby's car like they were planning something. I followed at a distance and watched them drive to Murphy's bar 3 blocks away. They sat in a corner booth, kept heads close together, and stayed for 2 hours. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't celebration. Security escorted me to my desk the next day to collect my belongings. 20 minutes to pack up 3 years of work. I gathered my coffee mug, my desk plant, and 2 binders labeled Controls and Wish List. The wish list was my collection of process improvements that management never had time to implement. Tessa appeared as I was boxing up my things. She wore a perfect expression of sympathy, all lip-biting concern and gentle head tilts. "Mara, I'm so sorry this happened," she said, glancing around to make sure people could hear her. "I brought you something to help with your case." She handed me a USB drive with a handwritten label. "Evidence. Keep safe." The plastic seal around the connector looked freshly applied, like it had been heat-shrunk recently. I slipped it into my pocket without plugging it into anything. "Thanks, Tessa. That's very thoughtful." Her smile flickered for just a second. "I hope everything works out, for the truth to come out." I nodded and kept packing. She waited for me to plug in the USB to show some gratitude, but I just kept folding papers. After an awkward moment, she walked away. Later, I'd learned that USB would have been my death sentence. I hired an employment attorney the next day. Patricia Klein had a corner office, a straight spine, and 0 tolerance for workplace nonsense. She listened to my timeline without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. "Here's what we're not going to do," she said when I finished. "We're not going to touch their systems. We're not going to investigate on our own. We're going to document everything and let process do the work." She slid a business card across her desk. "Kestrel and Reed Risk Advisory. They're hiring for a controls position. The managing partner is a former federal investigator." "You think they'll hire me? I'm suspended for fraud." "They'll hire you because you're suspended for fraud. Risk advisory firms need people who understand how these schemes work from the inside." I took the card. "And if I get the job?" "Then we wait for fate to hand us the right opportunity." In my experience, companies that frame employees usually have bigger problems. Those problems have a way of surfacing. She was right, but I didn't know how right until 3 months later. I interviewed with Kestrel and Reed the following week. I stuck to facts, showed my documentation, and got the offer. My first day, I bought a notebook that lay dead flat when opened. Kestrel and Reed operated out of a converted warehouse in the financial district. Glass offices, industrial lighting, and the quiet hum of people investigating other people's problems. I liked it immediately. My manager, Angela Reeves, was a former FBI white-collar specialist who spoke in measured sentences and never wasted words. She handed me my first case file on a Tuesday morning. "Mid-market tech company," she said. "Procurement anomalies flagged during their insurance audit. Vendor payments that don't match receiving records. Sound familiar?" I opened the file and saw the client logo. Northbridge Labs. My old employer. Angela watched my face carefully. "I can reassign this if there's a conflict." "No conflict," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I prefer the truth to comfort." She smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "Good answer. Your access letter includes authority to request immutable audit logs. Use it." I opened my new notebook to the first page and wrote, "If I'm right, the logs will tell on them." The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd framed me to hide their scheme, and now that same scheme had brought me back as their investigator. Walking into the Northbridge Labs lobby felt surreal. The security desk was the same, the elevator bank unchanged, but I wore a visitor badge now instead of my old employee ID. The receptionist didn't recognize me. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor with my investigator's laptop bag and a briefcase full of document requests. The doors opened, and Owen Pike stood waiting to board. He froze when he saw me. "Mara, what are you doing here?" "Consulting," I said, stepping past him into the hallway. He fumbled with his keycard, and I noticed fresh tape on the back like he'd just reattached the magnetic strip. "Consulting on what?" "Procurement irregularities. I'm sure you'll be hearing from us soon." Owen's face went pale. He tried to say something else, but the elevator doors closed between us. I walked down the familiar hallway toward the conference room where my career had supposedly ended. But I wasn't the same person who'd been escorted out in disgrace. I was back with authority, resources, and a very specific skill set. They'd taught me exactly what to look for. The kickoff meeting was in the same glass conference room where I'd been suspended. This time, I sat on the other side of the table with Angela and our forensic accountant. CFO Miles Ortega looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks. We appreciate Kestrel and Reed taking this on, Miles said, his jaw muscles tight. This insurance audit has raised some questions about vendor payments. We need clean documentation to move forward with our coverage. Angela slid our scope document across the table. We'll need full access to your ERP system, all vendor files and audit logs going back 12 months. Immutable logs, not summary reports. Miles scanned the document. Of course, we want this resolved quickly and fairly. Fairly is all we can promise, I said. But fairly goes both directions. He looked at me more carefully. Have we met? I used to work here, controls analyst until a few months ago. His expression shifted. Ah, well, I'm sure you'll be objective in your review. After the meeting, he sent me a time-stamped email with a memo attached. It was dated 3 weeks before my alleged approvals began, and it showed him rejecting Green Sparrow LLC as a vendor due to incomplete documentation. Someone had approved that vendor anyway. The data room was a windowless conference room with locked cabinets and a single computer terminal. Angela and I worked with IT to pull the ERP audit trails and help desk tickets. I didn't guess or infer. I tied specific events to specific times and people. The smoking gun appeared in the help desk logs. A password reset request for my account, submitted at 12:47 a.m. on February 7th. The first fraudulent approval hit at 3:03 a.m. that same night. Who submitted the reset request? Angela asked the IT manager. He pulled up the ticket details. Terminal ID shows workstation 4712. That's, he checked his map, Tessa Moran's desk. I made a note in my book. Feb 7, 12:47 a.m., password reset from Tessa's workstation. 3:03 a.m., first approval. Angela looked at me. Thoughts? Someone needed access to my account to make the approvals look authentic. They reset my password while I was traveling, used my credentials, then probably reset it again to cover their tracks. Can we prove that? I turned to the IT manager. Do you keep logs of successful password resets? He nodded and pulled up another screen. February 7th, 3:45 a.m., another reset on your account. Perfect. They'd cleaned up after themselves, but they'd left a trail of breadcrumbs in the process. We spent the next day running three-way matches on vendor invoices, purchase orders, receiving records, and payment authorizations. The pattern was obvious once you knew what to look for. Green Sparrow LLC had submitted invoices for consulting services worth $63,000 over 4 months. But there were no corresponding purchase orders, no receiving confirmations, and no evidence of any work being performed. Half the invoices showed receiving signatures from dock supervisor Jake Morrison, but when we called him, he'd never heard of Green Sparrow. I never signed anything for that company, Jake told me over the phone. Someone must have copied my signature from another receiving slip. I flagged every discrepancy in my notebook. The trail was getting clearer, but I needed to know who was behind Green Sparrow LLC itself. That afternoon, I ran a business registration search through the Secretary of State database. Green Sparrow LLC was registered to Prairie Finch Holdings at an address that turned out to be a mailbox store in the suburbs. Prairie Finch Holdings was registered to someone named Nash Colby R. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. They hadn't just framed me for their scheme. They'd used Colby's own relatives to set up the shell companies. The next morning, Colby called in sick with a doctor's appointment. His calendar showed the appointment set to private, which was unusual for someone who normally overshared every detail of his schedule. I asked Angela if we could schedule a vendor verification call with Green Sparrow LLC. Company policy required all vendors to complete annual verification interviews via video conference. We'll record it for compliance purposes, Angela said. Standard procedure. The call was scheduled for 2 p.m. A man joined the conference with his camera turned off, claiming technical difficulties. His voice was nervous, shaky. Can you tell us about the consulting services you provided to Northbridge Labs? I asked. Process improvement, efficiency consulting, that kind of thing. Which departments did you work with? Multiple departments. I'd have to check my files. What was your project deliverable for the February invoice? Long pause. I'm having trouble accessing that information right now. Can we reschedule? I ended the call and documented everything. 2 minutes later, someone tried to revoke my data room access. The attempt failed because our scope letter gave us irrevocable access, but it told me everything I needed to know. They were panicking. Angela called our legal team that afternoon. Within an hour, Northbridge Labs was under legal hold. No deletions of emails, chat logs, or device backups were permitted while our investigation continued. That's when IT discovered something interesting. A scheduled task on 3 company computers that would have run a cleanup script at midnight. The script was designed to clear browser caches, temporary files, and recent document histories. The 3 computers belonged to Owen Pike, Tessa Moran, and Colby Nash. When was this script scheduled? Angela asked the IT manager. Yesterday. Set to run every night for the next week. I checked my notebook. Yesterday was the day after Colby's mysterious doctor appointment, and the day we tried to interview Green Sparrow LLC. Angela turned to me. This is obstruction of justice. We need to brief counsel immediately. But as we were packing up our laptops, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or this gets worse for you. I showed Angela the screen. She took a photo with her phone and smiled grimly. They just made this a criminal matter. That evening, I was walking to my car in the Kestrel and Reed parking garage when I heard footsteps echoing behind me. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows between the concrete pillars. Mara, I turned. Tessa Moran stepped out from behind a pillar, her voice soft and urgent. She looked around nervously, checking the corners. You're making this worse for yourself, she said. Just let it go. I looked up at the security camera mounted above us and spoke clearly. Making what worse for whom? You know what? This investigation, it's not going to end the way you think. How do you think it's going to end, Tessa? She stepped closer and I could see fear in her eyes. Ask Victor about the signature, she whispered, then turned and walked quickly toward the exit. Victor Hale was the head of procurement. I'd barely interacted with him during my time at Northbridge, but Tessa's words suggested he was involved somehow. I sat at my car and added her exact words to my notebook. Then I called Angela. We need to look at procurement approvals, I said. All of them. The next morning, Miles Ortega forwarded me something that changed everything. A DocuSign audit trail showing an executive override to approve Green Sparrow LLC as a vendor. The electronic signature was his, dated February 5th at 2:11 a.m. But when I checked the technical details, the IP address didn't match any of Miles's known locations. The geolocation pinged to a residential area 15 minutes from Owen Pike's neighborhood. I called Miles directly. Did you sign this vendor approval? Absolutely not. I specifically rejected that vendor in writing. Someone forged my electronic signature. Have you ever used DocuSign from the IP address listed in this audit trail? I've never heard of that IP address. I signed documents from my home office or the corporate network. That's it. I hung up and cross-referenced the timestamp with Owen's badge activity. His keycard had accessed the building at 1:45 a.m. on February 5th, just 26 minutes before the forged signature. This wasn't just fraud anymore. It was identity theft, forgery, and obstruction of justice. But there was still more to uncover. Angela brought in a forensic IT specialist to analyze the deleted cleanup script. Within hours, they'd recovered the full code from system backups. The script was named nightowl.ps1, and it was designed to do more than clear browser caches. The script had copied my credential token from a shared kiosk computer in the training room. I remembered using that kiosk to print materials for a compliance workshop weeks before the fraud began. Who wrote this script? Angela asked the forensic specialist. The metadata shows it was created using a local administrator account that's frequently accessed by... He checked his notes. Owen Pike, network admin privileges. Everything clicked into place. Owen had used his IT access to steal my credentials. Tessa had initiated the password resets. And Colby had set up the shell companies to receive the fraudulent payments. But I still didn't understand why they'd chosen me as their scapegoat, or what they were really trying to hide. That answer came from an unexpected source. A junior analyst named Mina Kaur, who sent me an encrypted message requesting a private meeting. She had something to tell me, she said. Something that would explain everything. I met Mina at a coffee shop near the office. She looked nervous, checking over her shoulder every few minutes. When she sat down, she pulled out her phone and showed me a voice recording. I've been carrying this around for weeks, she said. I didn't know what to do with it. She pressed play. Tessa and Colby's voices filled my earbuds. Mara always works late anyway. People will believe she stayed after hours to approve payments. She's too meticulous. She'll look guilty when they investigate because she'll have some explanation for everything. The more detailed her defense, the more suspicious it'll seem. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. They'd planned this conversation, rehearsed their lines for the investigation that would follow. There's more, Mina said. They talked about timing it with your travel schedule to make it look more deliberate. Why are you telling me this now? Because I know you didn't do it, and because they're planning something else, something bigger. Will you go on the record with this? She nodded, but her voice was shaky. On one condition, I need immunity. There are things I haven't told anyone yet. Mina's immunity request led us to the real motive behind the fraud. She'd discovered a buried quality defect report tied to a potential customer recall, and Green Sparrow LLC's payments had spiked immediately after the report was filed. The fraud wasn't just theft. It was funding hush work to bury a safety defect that could have caused serious injuries. Show me the defect report, I said. Mina pulled up a shared drive folder labeled Retrospective Q1 Q2. It was completely empty, but the access logs showed recent activity from Victor Hale, the procurement head. It was here last week, Mina said. 40 pages documenting a circuit failure that could cause battery overheating in our new tablet line. Victor archived it the day after your suspension was announced. I checked the tablet launch timeline. The new product was scheduled to hit retail stores in 6 weeks. If there was a safety defect, thousands of customers would be at risk. Who wrote the original report? Alex Chen, one of our hardware engineers. But he was transferred to a different project right after he filed it. Angela and I exchanged looks. This wasn't just about framing me anymore. This was about covering up a potentially dangerous product defect. We had to move fast. With Mina's recording and testimony, Angela coordinated a carefully orchestrated sting operation. We scheduled a vendor re-onboarding meeting with Green Sparrow LLC, supposedly to update their paperwork and payment information. The vendor representative who showed up was actually an undercover investigator working with law enforcement. Angela and I presented our evidence, wire diagrams showing the money flow, the forged electronic signature, Owen's credential-stealing script, and Mina's recording. Colby's face went white when he realized the setup. Owen tried to leave, but security was waiting outside. Tessa sat in stunned silence as the investigator read them their rights. I want to call my lawyer, Colby said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's your right, the investigator replied. But we already have enough evidence to charge all 3 of you with fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. That afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. By evening, the local news was running a story about arrests at Northbridge Labs related to financial fraud and safety cover-ups. But the story wasn't over yet. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for the next morning. I sat in the back row as CEO Patricia Wells took the podium. Her voice was steady but strained as she addressed the entire company. Yesterday, 3 employees were terminated and arrested for financial fraud. Our investigation, conducted by Kestrel and Reed Risk Advisory, uncovered a scheme to embezzle company funds and conceal safety defects in our upcoming product line. She paused and looked directly at me. I want to publicly apologize to Mara Keating, who was wrongfully suspended in connection with this case. The evidence clearly shows she was framed by the actual perpetrators. Applause filled the auditorium. I felt tears sting my eyes but kept my expression composed. Effective immediately, Ms. Keating is offered the position of Head of Controls Remediation, reporting directly to the Board of Directors. After the meeting, Patricia approached me personally. We need someone who understands how these schemes work from the inside. Are you interested? I looked around the auditorium, at the 3 empty seats where Tessa, Colby, and Owen used to sit. I accept, I said. On one condition, we reopen the safety defect investigation immediately. My first act as head of controls remediation was to recover the buried defect report. IT forensics found multiple versions in the deleted files, showing how the original findings had been progressively watered down and then archived. The original engineer, Alex Chen, had documented a clear safety hazard: circuit failures that could cause battery overheating and potential fires. His recommendations included a full design review and possible recall of units already manufactured. Victor Hale had received the report and immediately classified it as confidential. Instead of escalating to product safety, he'd authorized payments to Green Sparrow LLC for additional testing and remediation work that never actually happened. The money had been funneled to Colby's shell companies, while the safety issue remained unaddressed. I prepared a comprehensive brief for the board and regulatory authorities. No grandstanding, no dramatic presentations, just forms, facts, and a clear timeline of who knew what and when. The recall proceeded immediately. Customers were notified, products were pulled from shelves, and the design flaw was fixed before anyone was hurt. But Victor's final email, sent just before his resignation, raised one last question. I was told to keep it quiet by executive management. Which executive? And how high did this cover-up go? The board launched a full governance review, and within 2 weeks, Director of Operations James Mitchell resigned to pursue other opportunities. Internal emails showed he'd been aware of the safety defect and had specifically instructed Victor to manage the issue quietly. His resignation letter was 3 sentences long and admitted no wrongdoing, but the paper trail was clear. He'd chosen profit margins over customer safety. And when Alex Chen's report threatened to delay the product launch, he'd authorized the cover-up. I negotiated a settlement for the months I'd lost and the damage to my reputation. Part of the settlement funding went toward establishing internal controls scholarships for young professionals entering the field. Standing in my new office, I looked out at the same parking garage where Tessa had tried to intimidate me. The same building where I'd been escorted out in shame. Now I had the authority to prevent something like this from happening again. My old coffee mug sat on the new desk, next to my notebook full of evidence and timelines. On the wall, I'd hung my certifications and a simple motto: process, not politics. 3 desks on the 4th floor remained empty, and probably would for a while. 6 months later, I testified at the criminal trial. Tessa, Colby, and Owen had all pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. They received sentences ranging from 2 years probation to 18 months in federal prison. Victor Hale was sentenced to 3 years for his role in the safety cover-up. James Mitchell faced civil penalties but avoided jail time. I kept my testimony factual and brief. The prosecutor asked if I felt vindicated. I feel like the system worked, I said. It took longer than it should have, but the truth came out. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked if I had any message for other employees who might face similar situations. Document everything, I said. Keep records, trust process over politics, and remember that the truth has a way of surfacing if you're patient enough to let it. Tessa was waiting by my car when I got to the parking lot. She looked older, tired, the confident smile was gone. I'm sorry, she said simply, for all of it. I nodded. I know. Can we ever? I forgive you, I said, but that doesn't mean I trust you. Those are different things. She walked away without another word. Today, I run the controls department at Northbridge Labs. We've implemented new safeguards, mandatory training, and a whistleblower protection program. Alex Chen returned to lead our product safety team. The tablet line was successfully relaunched 6 months later with the safety issues resolved. Sales exceeded projections, partly because customers appreciated the company's transparency about the recall. I still use my old notebook, though it's fuller now with new processes and procedures. The pages about my case are tucked in the back, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when people choose shortcuts over standards. My team knows my story. Some joined specifically because they'd heard about the case and wanted to work for someone who'd proven that integrity matters more than politics. Last week, a young analyst approached me with concerns about some vendor payments that didn't look right. She was nervous, afraid of making waves. Show me everything, I told her. That's what we're here for. The investigation is ongoing, but early signs suggest she caught something significant. The system is working the way it's supposed to. I didn't burn anything down. I just turned the lights on. When I walked back into that glass conference room 6 months after my suspension, I carried documentation, evidence, and legal authority. I had process on my side instead of just anger. Tessa, Colby, and Owen had counted on my silence, my shame, my willingness to disappear quietly. They'd assumed I'd take their word over my own experience, their narrative over my documentation. They forgot that I was a controls analyst. My job was finding discrepancies, following paper trails, and making sure the numbers added up. They'd taught me exactly what to look for when people try to hide the truth. The empty desks on the 4th floor aren't a monument to my revenge. They're a reminder that actions have consequences, that cutting corners eventually cuts back, and that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who understands your weaknesses better than anyone. I kept my old coffee mug because it reminds me who I was before this happened. Someone who believed in getting things right the first time. That person is still here, just with more experience and a bigger platform. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be documented, verified, and given enough light to shine. And when the facts light up the room, people who've been hiding in the shadows have nowhere left to stand.